So I'm your host, Lee Dahill, on Property Podcast today. I'm very, very pleased I've got Mario with me today. Mario runs a successful agency, Caridon, and it's great to have him on. We're going to talk a little bit about landlords buying at the moment, what you should be looking out for. But before we do that, I want to hand over to Mario for a little bit of background and introduction from him. So Mario, I'm going to be quiet. Over to you.
How you doing, Lee? You good?
Very good, buddy. I'm very good. Thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thanks for having me on. Yeah, I mean, look, I think it's always good to understand a little bit about people's journey first, because in social media today, there's a lot of experts in property, call them. And I think whenever I speak to people that are in the same field, I try to understand a bit of their background, and that kind of gives me a bit more of a knowledge how to go forward, depending on what they have experienced, so to speak. 100%. So I try and give you the short version. I know Christmas is around the corner, but I will be here for Christmas if I had to tell you the whole journey. So, I was introduced into property very, very young, and you're going to see how this relates to maybe some of the questions after. I was literally going to property auctions when I was 11. So, the social services weren't about in those days, luckily. So I was put to work very, very young. So I guess I had a lot of knowledge. My dad, come over in the 50s, a small businessman. He pushed me straight into property. Didn't give me any money, but he said, look, learn about property. This is the future. And from the auction point of view, I learned a lot about the basic things, the fundamentals of, buying below market, how the markets work. And that kind of, by the time I was 18, I bought my first property. So, whether you want to call it the typical traditional buy-to-let type model, then, so I bought my first property, and that's where it all started. Over the years, obviously, I've grown and I've kind of diversified from different types of property investments, from typical PRS, student accommodation, all sorts of developments and construction, from the typical conversions through to new builds and what have you. And I think the principle's always been the same. How do you add value? That's the key, right? We can talk about buy-to-lets, we can talk about all these things here, but as an investor, you want to know, if you're going to buy something, are you going to make money, and how to de-risk it. And I think where I can add a little bit more value is I felt the pain. So, back in the 90s, I'm a bit older than you. I had the interest rates, which I think they were around 14%.
Yep.
And people were saying to me, sell, you shouldn't hold it because 14%, it's crazy interest rates. But for me personally, I knew that I bought well. If I could just sustain those interest rates, then I knew that, the market would eventually change. So I kind of went through that cycle of interest rates. Then through the 90s over to 2000, had kind of the upward trend, call it, where I built a big portfolio, was flying, thinking I was untouchable, so to speak. And then I saw the crash of 2008, which kind of was probably the worst experience of my life, but the best. I lost everything. I had a sizable portfolio at the time, but literally I always say that the lights switched off overnight, and I lost everything to the point where I think my mortgage was £400 a month. I couldn't even afford that. So dark times, but I learned through those two experiences, from the high interest rates through the crash, what was key, whether you're developing or you're converting or you're investing in property, was income. Was a key part. And I think, especially in the 2008 crash, where I was exposed a lot to new build, kind of buy-to-let type properties as well, I realised quickly that, whatever I was buying, the income wouldn't cover the mortgage. So I was exposed there, and obviously the banks stopped lending at the same time. So I was in a tricky situation. Yep. I ended up getting bridging loans. I had £20 million of bridging loans on my back. So that was a bit of a weight on my shoulders. And I think my path changed there for a few reasons, because when you lose, you learn a lot about yourself, about everything. And then you take a different approach on business. You evaluate the market, evaluate what you should be doing with yourself, and basically change direction by default, really. And I was able to house a vulnerable person, homeless person, into one of my properties, who's a friend of mine who was street homeless. And I didn't know that by housing that individual, that my life was going to change. And that's kind of what brought me to where I am today, where, I've set up the Caridon Group, which was founded in 2009 in the crash. And again, just to give you an example, it was a crisis, it was a crash, and people were saying, you're mad, setting up a business in the crash. But similar to when the interest rates go up, I think with any crisis, you can find opportunities. You just need to know
100%.
where, and you need to know how to add value. And I think when you're put in a corner, you quickly find ways of adding value. So 2009, I saw there was an opportunity in the market where a lot of people were, there was a stigma around housing vulnerable people or people on low income. And for me, I didn't see that. I saw that as, you can make a profit, but you're doing something good. You're making the difference in housing. For me, that was the key side for me. I thought, if I can help people still make a profit, it's a win-win for everybody. Could I make a business of it? Although the margins were tighter, I knew it was sustainable because the income was solid. And that's kind of where the business started. And obviously since then we've grown the business now. So, we're an award-winning company. Ultimately, what we do, we provide a home for people in need. I think what makes us stand out is that we're able to add value, like I said, and still provide really good service to our tenants, our landlords, and our shareholders. But like I said, that balance between the profit and making a difference being key. I think I've probably provided a home to over 15,000 homeless and vulnerable people. So, it's been a long road.
Yeah, something beautiful's happened from that, that experience that you had that was the hardest time of your life.
Yeah.
Something good's come of it.
Yeah, and so what's happened organically, we've grown and we've created a few arms to the business. We've got a development arm where we kind of manage and we provide elements of support. We develop, so basically end-to-end service on our development and asset management side. We have Caridon Property, where we provide the houses for people most in need. But at the same time, we give a rent guarantee to landlords. So that kind of works well with a lot of landlords that want that security. We have Caridon Foundation, which is a not-for-profit arm, where we provide a lot of the support services for and counselling and kind of advice on welfare reform. And then we have Caridon Young Living, which is more around support for young adults, and we've gone into children's homes now as well. And then recently we've just launched Caridon Estates, funny enough, it's literally a few weeks ago. And we're trying to take a different approach to the traditional kind of sales and lettings model, where we're working with a lot of landlords, trying to make them understand that the market has changed. And with our experience, we're showing them how we can add value to their properties when they're trying to sell. And that could be adding value to the assets themselves through reconfiguration, whether it's, HMOs and what have you, or adding, value to the income itself with long-term agreements. And I've been able to do that through that experience, like I said earlier, because I kind of started off by adding values from reconfiguring properties, going on to HMOs. I've got over 400 HMOs myself, so I know the HMO market pretty well. And so we've kind of come to a good place in the business where we have around 2,500 properties that we own and manage. We're looking to expand still, and we do a lot of partnerships with different investors, and that could be the small type of investor that comes to us that bangs on the door and says, look, I want to do a little buy to let or some sort of partnership, which we do, and we give advice there. But I will go back to the fundamentals about when it comes to investment. A lot of it boils down to the appetite of risk. That's where it starts from, right? But anyway, that's a kind of very, very short version of kind of my life.
And I think let's talk. I appreciate that, Mario, and I appreciate you explaining it all. And let's talk on the investment side of it, right? So let's pick a landlord right now. When they could look at investing in anything that they want, they could look at the traditional stuff. Why should they look at, for example, a buy to let? What advice could you give them on that journey of purchasing, and why should they look at buy to let?
I mean, when you say buy to let, not get fixated on the buy to let, because that's like a tool, right? It's the tool of enabling you to buy any investment type of property. I think a lot of it boils down to what is the investment firstly, what are you buying firstly? And like I said, I think we're going back, your appetite for risk. And why do I say that? Because if you look at yields, for example, at the moment, it's obvious if you know, I think at the moment the highest kind of yielding areas of Scotland doing really, really well. And then if you go to London, obviously the yields are a lot tighter. So it depends on your risk. If you want to go further afield, you're going to get high yields. There obviously can be capital growth there, but from my experience, as I've stretched out further afield from the kind of central areas, you can have the higher yields, but then you run the risk if there's a crash that you see the depreciation in the assets. So you first it's about what you're willing to risk, okay? And there's no crystal ball, because ultimately, if you look at the market, it's up, the ups and downs are there. But you can still make money on buy to lets. Of course you can. So you've got to find the right type of locations. So of course, at the moment, I've mentioned Scotland as one, but anywhere where there's universities, of course, I've been in the student sector. There's a strong market there. You know, there's always going to be a demand there, so you shouldn't have any issues there. But it's about also the type of property you're buying, and it starts from buying well. So whatever market you're in, if you're overpaying for something, you're always going to be on the back foot. So the key is try and negotiate well. And I think, although there's a lot of, you know, at the moment, fear in the market because of what's happened with legislation, you know, from everything from tax structures, stamp duty, you know, and a whole list of issues that are making it more challenging. You've got to look at the opportunities there too. So take the EPCs as an example. You know, there's a big fear about the EPCs because, you know, typical landlord doesn't have the money to try and upgrade their property. They may have a D or an E, but it has to be a C in the next year or so. So for me, that's an opportunity. So I'm out there actively looking for properties that have low EPCs, because I know I can add value there. And how will it work? I'll buy that property, or I'll JV, and I'll say to the landlord, you're struggling to sell. How about I invest 10, 20,000, whatever it may be, that's required to enhance the value. So there's always opportunities in a challenging market, and EPCs is just one example. So obviously at the moment there's lots of talk of you know, the short let market, HMOs. But there are, unfortunately, you've got to be mindful of that too, because even the short let market, Airbnb, there's many cities around the world now, they're putting a lot of legislation in to stop that, because the big hotels don't like the Airbnb model. Let's be real for a second. So you've got to be careful that you don't set up a whole business on a short let model. And you've got to be mindful of the changes in legislation and planning, because a lot of people do the short-term model without planning, and then just, you know, split a flat and rent it to an Airbnb, which is all good if you've got one property. If you want to build a business, it's not stable. So the basic way, if you're going into the buy-to-let market, is look at properties that can naturally be reconfigured. So when I started up, I was buying 1-bedroom flats, converting them into 2-bedroom flats where there was you know, enough space, 2-bedroom houses into 3. So what I'm talking about is diversifying the portfolio to a degree. So anything from you know, creating more space in flats or houses through to the HMOs. That's a very, very simple way of adding value. And it's about you creating more income, right? Because if you looked at just yields, you say to yourself, it doesn't make sense, nothing viable. You look at like an average buy-to-let rate versus, you know, what your borrowing rate is, you know, you're going to be in a loss-making position. So how to avoid that is to create more income. Very simple. You create more income. So you've got to, when you go and look at any opportunity, you've got to say, okay, it's making this at the moment, but what can I achieve if I do this? You know, we do rent guarantees, which has long-term agreements. So a lot of landlords like that because they know they've got that long-term income and that security. So the rents were a bit lower, but it's secure. You've got to be mindful of the voids, vacancies. That's a big killer. So I think there are ways, but it starts from the most basic thing. Buy right. Look for the deals. And you know, don't get rushed in. Don't rush in to just buy something, because I've got people that come to me and say, I'm a buy-to-let landlord and I have a portfolio of 10 buy-to-lets, which sounds amazing, but when you look at the balance sheet, it's making a loss. So you've got to be careful how you build your portfolio to begin with, to make sure it's structured right, especially if you've bought it in your personal name, you've got concerns there, obvious things like that. And what is the long-term goal, right? And I've seen it, going back from my example, when my interest rates were high, 14%, everyone was selling around me. And you imagine overnight, my mortgage payments quadrupled. And your natural instinct is to sell. I was able to remortgage with the banks and have enough coverage in the bank by remortgaging to cover me for 1 or 2 years, thank God. And thank God I didn't sell, because those properties went up 5 times from the 90s to where we are today. So there is a bit of holding on, and that's the general kind of feel in property. If you can hold it, you will sustain it. If you're going to do a buy to let and you think you're going to buy it and sell it tomorrow, it's unlikely. And unfortunately, you need to kind of build scale to a degree. So, you kind of not all your eggs in one basket, so to speak. So if you've got a balanced portfolio, 5, 10 properties, there's going to be some that, make more and some. But if you only got one and you got only one income, then it's obviously a bit more high risky. So you've got to be careful how you build your portfolio, is what I'm saying.
And Mario, I want to ask you just on when you say about adding value and you took a flat from, say, 1 bed to 2 bed.
Yeah.
So did you look at, for example, if it had a large kitchen, that you could move that kitchen into the front room and have a front room kitchen open plan and turn that into a bedroom? Is that what you mean?
I mean, basic principle. So, in the 90s, there was a lot of, you were able to buy a lot of council properties as well. So the traditional, even, above commercial. So the retail market is suffering at the moment. We all know that since COVID. But for me, I love retail. I love commercials with resi above. And what you find with the resis above, they are, very square boxes, which is may not, look beautiful. They might not be the trophy asset, but they're square. They've got a lot of space, so they will generally have its own kitchen, its own living room, and 2 bedrooms. So automatically, you can make that into 3 bedrooms. A lot of the older houses have bathrooms, very big bathrooms, which the bathrooms could become bedrooms. Then you create bathrooms in between the 2 larger bedrooms. Because the bathroom doesn't need natural light always, right? So it's about, when you're assessing the property, you're looking at the basic things like the square footage, obviously, and you see if the layout, and then obviously subject to any planning and what have you. But you look at 100, at least 10% of them can be done, and it is a bit of a volume thing. We have to go out there looking, and you've got to be active, of course.
Yeah, and I want to ask you about looking, which my final sort of advice question really is: how many will you look at to find the right one? So, like, instead of, I know you said about, don't just buy the first one you see. How many sometimes do you look at that you would say is a good number to try and find the right thing?
Look, when I first started off, I was going to every estate agency and making offers on hundreds of properties to buy one. That's the reality, because the problem is it's a bit like, when you go, I don't know if you've been in auction before, but there's a buzz in auction, and if you're a novice, you'll go in there, you'll overpay. I've seen it so many times. I've seen people overpaying auction because there's that excitement, and it's a bit like if your first buy to let, you would just want to get on the ladder, and that's the biggest mistake you want to do. Is you want to look at 20. Don't be afraid to offer make a silly offer. What's the worst that's going to happen? They're going to say no. But what you don't want to do is pay over, because if this market goes the wrong way, then you're going to be in trouble. So you need to be out there looking at numerous opportunities before you do one. That's the reality.
Mario, I think all of that stuff you've given us today, buddy, is great advice, and I'm so grateful you're taking your time out and going through everything, and I'm very grateful for you coming on the show.
No problem. It's a pleasure to be on it. Thank you very much.